Welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight, and today Troy McLachlan is back, and he has a very interesting subject, among other things. Yeah, he is in the process of writing an article about Atlantis, secret societies, and the theft of the divine sovereignty. So I can't wait to hear about that. So, Troy, welcome back.
Oh, it's great to be back. What you're referring to there, I've been invited to contribute an article to a compendium of articles by various people dealing with esoteric subjects, and it's been a rather interesting project, and it's scheduled to be published in print form and also in electronic form, I believe, later this year. But it's going through its final proofings and things like that now. And as I say, it's been a very interesting topic. I've actually learned a lot taking on the idea that was initially pitched to me to write about. So, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I hear, and I mean that is what I'm reading right now, is Britain is bracing for a blackout as well.
Yeah. It wouldn't surprise me. I'm pretty much convinced that a lot of this kind of stuff that we're all going through, various countries, Germany, Britain, the United States will be going through it, these major countries. It's very much contrived. It's part of a process that is going off half-baked, in my opinion, because they didn't have the full deal. They never got their war, their international conflict in the way that they expected. And for your listeners who might be new to it, by that I mean elements of what I call the Satan death cult culture, but other people refer to as the deep state, and essentially the elite power groups in the world, who know that in my opinion, every 70 to 100 years, they have to reset the world system in order to maintain control, to move on to their next part of their ongoing, now well over nearly 3,000 year long agenda. But yeah, power blackouts and so on, I think, are all part of the process of breaking us down so that we scream, please come save us. We'll do anything if you just make it back to how it was.
Yeah, but do you really think they thought that through? Because more and more people are making the connections now, things like that might not be that accidentally. So I don't know.
Well, the last time we had a thing like this, Judith, you got to go back to Gutenberg and his printing press.
Yeah.
And that kind of disruptive technology that made it possible for individuals and groups of individuals to organize, to break away from the power of the Catholic Church, and basically what had been set up under Catholicism in terms of Roman law and so on throughout Europe. This is what we're going through on a global level at the moment, and it's very hard, as somebody who's not an insider, which is the vast majority of us, to really pick out who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, what the next move is, that kind of thing. But the internet and just even what you and I are doing now, this kind of thing, I'm speaking to somebody from Germany. We've never met in person or anything. I never ever, when I was growing up, I never thought I would end up having a series of interviews with somebody from Germany. I never thought somebody from Germany would ever know I existed. But that's the world we live in now, and it's making all the difference. It's so threatening to the what people refer to as the powers that be, that these sorts of changes, they're acting out of desperation to maintain their hegemony over society that they've enjoyed for at least since the Renaissance.
Yeah, for instance, here in Germany, I'm noticing that more and more you know, not only demonstrations, there are a lot of, yeah, public letters
Yeah.
addressed to the government, and the most recent ones are from, yeah, an organization of, you know, what you call handyman, yeah,
Okay.
plumbers,
Yeah.
and, you know,
Hmm.
people like that.
Yeah.
And in that open letter, they very blatantly ask, Mr. Chancellor, are you willing to sacrifice the entire country?
Right. Yeah.
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 So it's the cat is out of the box. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
So
And there's censorship through social media platforms that have very dubious origins in terms of
yeah.
the intelligence community and so on. Even that is breaking down with new platforms coming online. I have an elderly mother who still tends to get her news from what we call mainstream or legacy media. She can't quite grasp that now the vast majority of people, particularly under the age of 40, are getting, are bypassing this. Most of the time, the only time they watch legacy media or read the legacy papers is really just to, confirm through pictures or video what they've heard is going on. If it's some sort of event where a bomb's gone off or whatever it might be that's caught their interest. They're going elsewhere. I know that the vast majority of people are still also trapped in that, sort of very facile look at the world where they're obsessed with celebrity and this sort of thing. But the exposure to different means of getting information is waking a tremendous amount of people up. And people like my mother, who's now in her 80s, and that they can't quite get their head around it. It's always been that guy reading the news on the TV, the newspaper in the morning. And you know, but it's happening, and it makes me very optimistic, as I've often said to you in a lot of interviews. I'm very optimistic about the future.
Yeah. Yeah, even my mother, she's in her 80s, but after her life partner died after his third jumbo juice,
Mhm.
um, yeah, she is
Dead.
far more
Yeah.
open. Yeah. And now, you know, let's say beginning of 2020, I couldn't address a lot
Mm.
of things with her.
Yeah.
She just said to me, yeah, let's switch the subject. So now it's a whole different gameplay.
Really.
So
So
mm,
she's warmed up to the idea that there may
yeah,
be
because
alternative.
she
Yeah.
she you know, I didn't say anything. There was
Mm.
one day when she mentioned it, that she's
Right.
suspicious of that point in time when it
Hmm.
happens, because it was shortly after that.
Right.
And that much she knew, that is one of a stroke is one of the classic ones. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's such a
uh,
shame that she had to experience a loss for that to happen. You
yeah.
know, it's,
Yeah.
but a lot of people are doing it. I mean, I don't know. My own personal thing is every time I turn on or go online onto the internet, turn on my computer and so on, I am seeing the death of young sports people, young entertainment figures, people who shouldn't be dying at this age, fit and healthy, people who are at the top of their chosen professions and sports and so on. It seems that there is a definite acceleration in sudden, unexplained deaths, unexplained in terms of what the media portray to us.
Yeah.
But in that sense, it is truly terrifying. I have family members who are all gung ho for, what did you call it? Jungle juice.
Jumbo too.
Yeah. To go and get this thing put into them. And, nothing so far has happened and such, but I am glad that you know, I lead a lifestyle that allowed me to not be pressured into
Mm.
taking something because of a job commitment or contracts or something like that, which are all illegal according to Nuremberg, laws and things like that that cover this. But nonetheless, that's what, for 2 years, we were under that kind of assault.
Mm. I think it goes even deeper. I understand the pressure that your employer can put on you. I
Yeah,
get it.
yeah,
And but I think it is not only, that they somehow count it as that you agree to it. Yeah.
yeah. Mm.
And even if you have been pressured into it, but I think in a way it's like, at least that is what it feels to me. Nobody has to take that on board, but it feels to me as if you are, especially if as if you are giving your soul away.
Yeah. Mm. And of course, I've read the people that are making claims that this may actually be what the whole thing is designed to do, is to limit what some people refer to the soul or the spiritual being,
Mhm.
to basically somehow interfere with its ability to connect with the greater cosmos.
Mhm.
Whatever path one takes in exploring, this cosmos, this universe that we live in, it may be that what has been foisted on us is some form of alteration to control one's ability to explore one's own destiny, one's own way of reaching out into the cosmos and so on. In other words, it's like that whole sort of idea about artificial intelligence. No matter how incredibly lifelike it becomes, it will never have a soul. It will never have a spiritual basis that seems to be innate when that spark of something that we call life enters into the body of what the individual human being is. But the idea of having a kill switch introduced into the DNA of every human being that allows control over dissenters and so on
Mhm.
is probably the most frightening concept to ever come out of people's wondering as to what's going on. But they are wondering, and that's good.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I think that, some people are musing about that Mr. Putin is fighting the deep state and the crooked financial system. But honestly, when I look at Russia, I see the same agenda going on as well. Just recently, Moscow implemented pay with your face, a biometric pay system that you
Right.
can use on buses and elsewhere. Um, he didn't step up at the beginning in 2020 and said, "Look, guys, this is all nonsense, and here's why." And we are going to handle this in a different way. I didn't see that happening. And of course, then we have the Russia 20, Russia 2045 project, which is, my goodness, that's a heaven for any transhumanist. And that in 2045, there will be the first avatars and so on and so forth. So I don't see the big difference.
Right. I think I tend to view these things as squabbles, or they're much more than squabbles, really. Squabbles is what happens between people who sit on the board of the Federal Reserve or
Mm.
members of the royal family in England, or that kind of thing. Okay, but it's a changing over of the dominant culture that we have on the planet. Everybody's been looking at the Chinese as the possible successor to the American century, as they tended to call that. And we've had kind of the European millennium since the Protestant Reformation in terms of the power of the European nations to go around and create their colonies, their empires. The biggest one being the British Empire that spawned the United States in terms of that. And I think Russia is just part of that great game, to use a term that's often, when it comes to British, Anglo-American concerns with Russia, that great game, that hegemony over the world island, the continent of Asia, joined with Africa and so on. And so therefore there's a changing of the guard, so to speak, not necessarily at that level, a changing of, spiritual values, if you know what I mean. It's interesting that, we've discussed previously before this interview of looking into some of the sort of esoteric takes on a lot of this kind of thing. I thought it would come up later, but I think it's pertinent to mention now that in a lot of esoteric literature, you've probably heard of Rudolf Steiner,
Yes.
the German anthroposophist, philosopher and so on. He was a great believer that we are on the cusp, as in the middle of the 21st century, would see the rise of the Slavic bloc in the world at the expense of the Anglo-American bloc. And Germany, because of the connections, because the English are effectively a German subgroup, their language and so on, the Anglo-Saxon peoples and so on, as they're part of the Germanic group. So that includes the Germanic world with the Anglo-American world. And, we know that the United States has a tremendous German, influence in its population.
We are still an occupied country. We have never been sovereign after the Second World War. True. A lot of things that are being decided here are actually being decided in Washington.
That's right. And that whole symbiotic relationship between the way the CIA simply co-opted the Reinhard Gehlen organization after the Second World War, and that was used to fight the Cold War. Basically, ex-Nazi Gestapo guys were co-opted into the Anglo-American intelligence establishment, and Operation Paperclip. It's Germany, Great Britain, and its dominions, and the United States are pretty much have operated, as the same entity in world politics. The esoteric thinking is that will give way to the rise of the Slavic nation, or the Slavic mindset, I think, is a better way to understand it. One can become Slavic. We're not talking racial groups here. We're talking a way of thinking that is that sort of fundamental difference. And I think that's what we're seeing in the way of Putin and so on like that. For those people who follow New Age beliefs, or people like myself who follow very alternative Christian ideas about the establishment of, if we wanted a better term, a kingdom, a way of thinking that provides justice for all and produces a better living and so on. My hope is that the Anglo-American Germanic world free themselves of what I consider the most insidious influence, which is central banking. As you know, we've talked often about that side of thing. And once they're free of that, they hopefully will be happy to just let Russia get on with what it wants to do, the Slavic people, and we can get back to reestablishing, equal weights and measures as my is my hobby horse when it comes to this kind of thing. We can get back to a system where we are governed by equal weights and measures, and not by the diverse levels of influence individuals have compared to other individuals. And it would be nice if that happens. We need peace with Russia. We need peace with China to be able to do that. But it is my opinion that the dynamic element that always manifests itself. The Chinese were the most dynamic people going on 2,500 years ago, with the Tang Dynasty, the ancient Chinese. That was an extremely dynamic culture. You passed into the Middle Eastern influences sort of in the world as well. You had the dynamic cultures of Mesoamerica for a large part of when Europe fell into its dark ages and so on. You get these cultural groups that become so dynamic for a period of time. It seems everything emanates out of them. That's passing from the Anglo-American German world at this stage. We've had it for 300-400 years. And I think Putin's taking advantage of that, because Putin's a nationalist at the end of the day. I don't think the difference here is that it doesn't seem like there's much. Putin loves control as much as any monopolist would like, and so on. In terms of that, they think in terms of government as a control mechanism rather than a justice mechanism. All right, it's a way of defining what you will do, not what you can't do. And I've always made that distinction. As soon as you enter into a culture where you're told this is the way you will live your life and only this way, you're in trouble. You've got problems. You want to live in cultures that say, here are the rules that you can't break, but other than that, you're free to live your life unimpeded. Just don't break these boundaries. And that's up for discussion what those boundaries might be. So Putin is one of those. But what Putin is not is he is not a globalist. So he's not pursuing this in the way that we see the World Economic Forum with its connections with Soros and the usual suspects in terms of the Anglo-American banking intelligence.
But he was a young global leader.
Sorry?
But he was a young global leader.
And he's broken from it, I believe. Because being a nationalist, he'll support certain elements of what they do, but he wants Russia to be, to have more say than it was having, in terms of the past. That's simply because he has that nationalist idea. Putin is one of these people who understands that a nation needs three factors. It needs a people, it needs a territory, and it needs a unifying factor, i.e. a religion. So being brought up a communist, being brought up a good KGB guy, I think he spent most of his KGB time in your country, I think East Germany, by all accounts, he speaks fluent German. He's had his daughters grow up with German educations, that sort of stuff. So he tends to like, Germany and its culture and such, but he likes the idea of multipolar nations controlling the world, not a single entity controlling the world. Still in that sense, a controlling factor. So in terms of what I myself look at in the world, it's that old story, my enemy's enemy is my friend. And if Putin brings about the destruction of the Anglo-American banking cabal, which I squarely put all of the carnage of the 20th century at their feet, in terms of what has gone down, whether it was supporting communism in Russia, Bolshevism, as I prefer to call it, fascism in Europe, Italy and Germany, and mercantile, imperialism in Japan, Britain, and the United States. These are the philosophies of the debt-based financial banking elite, that hidden kingdom that I refer to in my book as Mystery Babylon. I take that term from a biblical idea, which we discussed in the past, for those who haven't heard that sort of idea. But it basically, it's my nomenclature for identifying the international banking system that we are seeing imploding at the moment. And it is the biggest factor and the most astounding thing that I'm going to put this. Since about the age of 20, I've known that the banking system was ground zero for what was wrong with the world. Get rid of that, and we tend to sort of solve a lot of the problems, that social problems, racism, inequality, justice, that kind of stuff goes out of the way, because we're not all fighting over that dwindling amount of cash in order to, we're not, we're at the end of every year, somebody always loses. No matter what happens, how hard they work, somebody is always going to lose. It's just built into it. Well, that had to implode. And it has imploded a number of times, and they just simply reintroduce a new system, whether it's Bretton Woods after the Second World War, the Federal Reserve System at the beginning of last century. They've been able to do that, and I'm hoping that this time, and I'm seeing lots of evidence of it, that they are not going to be able to do that. And the single biggest factor is that I have seen in watching it since I've been 18, I'm 56 now, been watching this as this is the key to it. The single biggest factor that I have ever seen in confronting these people was Russia insisting that people pay for their oil in rubles. That was such a challenge because people who had tried that, Gaddafi's, Saddam Hussein, these kinds of people, and so on, had always basically been invaded. The American war machine was sicked on them, and that was the end of them. And you always knew it had to do with that, because when they got rid of Gaddafi, what was the first institution that they instituted in Libya after his thing? They didn't institute a hospital system. Didn't institute a welfare or something like that. We've got to have a central bank. Immediately hook that country into the broadening scope of the world central banking system. Of course, the Muslim nations have always been a problem for the international banking world, particularly when they control so much of the resources that the world needs. But yeah, for me, those guys couldn't do that, could not challenge the Anglo-American hegemony, that banking system, but Putin has. And even though he may be this kind of guy, I've never thought about, hey, I'm going to move to Russia because that guy Putin is my man. That's just not sort of being that part. I've respected the fact that as a Christian, he seems to genuinely want to look after the interests of Christians in Syria, these sorts of things, and that he has done. I've respected that and seen some of his things, but the main thing about him is that he has taken on what I call Mystery Babylon head on, and he seems to be winning, and that's quite something. Where it goes from there after that is a matter, of course. My hope is that the Anglo-American and even Germanic worlds get their act together and start pursuing that which has always been part of our culture, the idea that justice is more important than influence, that you must have equal weights and measures for the lowest person. The least intelligent person, the least educated person must know that they have access to justice as much as the highest person in the land, whoever that might be. And so my hope is that, being freed from the banking institutions, our sphere, the English-speaking world, the German-speaking world, will get back to rediscovering those values and implementing them.
Okay, so now we will leave the 3D realm and I will start with a confusion. It will bear with me while I develop that thought. So for the ancient people, the appearance of Venus was a good sign, because it was a sign that indicated the light is coming back. The darkness of the night is going to fade, and the light is coming back, hence the light bearer or the light bringer. So yeah, okay, these days it doesn't matter so much as long as you have electricity. And we in that sense, it was a good, the appearance of Venus for the ancient people was a good thing. So now we know that Plato, for instance, but he is not the only one. Ancient people attached, personalities to planets. Plato identified Hermes with Mercury, Lucifer with Venus. And if you look at images of ancient Venus statues, you would see a very, very voluptuous woman. Then you have the painting of the Venus in the shell with the long red hair. There she has dropped a considerable amount of
quite so Rubenesque.
Yeah. And then fast forward from that, Venus ends up as a skinny white dude on Netflix.
White dude? Oh, of course, yes, yeah.
Yeah, so now we also have the line of thought that Lucifer equals Satan. So, but from that point of view, Satan would be Saturn, not Venus. And we certainly have this feminine aspect with Venus. With even John Lamb-Lash made a video that Sophia is Lucifer. So I'm really confused. I find it so many thoughts out there, but to me, that Satan is Lucifer, that doesn't make sense, because what I read when you know about Satan, that's usually identified with a male aspect. So and that is not the case with Venus or Lucifer. So what say you?
Well, you're touching upon something that is actually, in my opinion, is a great illustration of how messed up and how confused the church dogmas have become in terms of their theology from the Bible. In a nutshell, the concept of a devil, Satan, Lucifer being all the same thing is a very recent Christian concept in the greater scheme of things, all right, in terms of New Testament Christianity and so on, okay? It changes when you go back to Old Testament writings and then, of course, into the mythologies and so on as to what's going on. And, of course, it's a very important part of comparative mythology in terms of my area, which is this whole Saturn theory idea, this idea that the pantheon of the gods in the various cultures are all comparative to each other. They all have, if you take the Roman idea of their gods, there is an equivalent to Saturn in every other culture. There's an equivalent to Venus in every other culture. There's an equivalent to Mars and so on like that. And it's really down to almost Jungian archetypes that help you identify the initial archetypes behind the behavior of what these gods were. The fact that Aristotle, and even Plato, but Aristotle in particular, defines for us that in ancient times it was the stars or the wandering stars, the planets, that were associated with the gods. They were the gods and so on. And so a lot of people, you know, I've said this to you in previous discussions where we've been discussing my book Sad and Death Cult specifically, And that this idea that the skies that the ancients saw were very, very different and very frightening compared to the sky we see today. Why did the ancients tell us that Saturn was actually our original sun and it shone brilliantly in the north, when it supposedly, according to modern science, has been a pinprick of light for 5 billion years out on the edge of the solar system, and certainly has only been that way, according to them, during the history, the historical record of mankind, or the experience of the species called mankind, humankind. This is at odds with what all mythologies tell us about these, identifying marks of these planets that became synonymous with the power of certain god archetypes, and are related back to us down through the ages in the mythologies. And of course, in a nutshell, Saturn Death Cult is about how mythology is the record of planetary interactions, disasters that were seen as the work of the gods. And as a result, it became extremely important to watch to watch the planetary bodies when there was that great chaotic time, particularly at the end of what's called the Golden Age, and the great cataclysm of doomsday that all mythologies talk about, the destruction of the rule of the Saturn god, creator's abode of gods, his way of doing things, and the rise of Jupiter and so on, and all these aspects that have come to influence our religions profoundly. It was primarily the astrologers and the astronomers were one and the same. They watched what these planets did because they had extremely chaotic and erratic orbits for a time that caused untold destruction amongst themselves. That's the scar on planet, that canyon that, Marinus Vallis said completely dwarfs the Grand Canyon in the United States, is a product of the interplanetary electrical thunderbolt interactions that took place. So it was very important to watch these planetary bodies, because if they erred, if they suddenly went erratic again, it could mean the death of a civilization. It could bring the kind of destruction through electrical interactions on the planet that could wipe out kingdoms, civilizations, could even threaten the species' survival, as it was. So it was a very scary time. And I believe that it didn't really settle down until about 500 BC, or 500 before current era. And one of the most important of those planets, apart from Saturn, but one of the most important of those planets that really seemed to visit destruction on the Earth, i.e. it would fly close by, it would oscillate down towards Earth and so on, was what was identified as the planet Venus. And Venus was known as the morning star. And Venus had this persona where it was this beautiful symbol of beauty in the heavens. The way the electrical energy worked around Venus while it was entrapped in Saturn's Birkeland current between the Earth and Saturn and so on, it produced these effects like a scallop shell, an oyster shell sort of look. The 8-pointed star that has always been the symbol of the variations of Venus, the star of Ishtar, the star of Astaroth, and so on like that. These sorts of ideas. The idea of a maypole, the sort of dancing around a pole or a tree with ribbons and so on. This is all evocative of the extreme electrical energy that Venus was famous for at these times, as a god. But that could turn destructive. So Venus could quickly become a Medusa, the serpentine hair that could strike out, the look that would turn a man to stone. The legend of is Jason? Is it who slew the I was going to say Theseus, but he's the Minotaur slayer. Sorry, had a blank there. Who actually went and killed the Medusa. But it's interesting because high voltage electricity and these kind of bolts and things like that, this has the potential to turn carbon forms into silicate. This is what petrification is. And the idea that the Medusa, which is is the evil sort of variant of this beautiful, loving symbol of love and fertility, turned into a destructive, the witch of medieval thinking and so on, into this Medusa, turning people to stone, is very consistent with being hit by massive electric thunderbolts, as described in Saturn theory, the subset of the electric universe model, and is also probably indicative of what happened when, in the Bible, Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, and Lot's wife looked around when they were escaping the city, and she was turned to a pillar of salt. Basically, I think she was the natural explanation for that was that she was basically electrocuted into a silicate form. This happens. It's a famous account of a man who had an accident up in Canada with the high voltage lines right up in the wilds, and he lost his leg, and they had to leave his foot where it was to fly him back to get help. When they went back for the foot, because it had been in the electrical field and the high tension wires, it had literally become stone. It had solidified. Which gives another indication of what happens, the electric universe idea of what happens with fossilization. It's not a slow process; it can be an instantaneous process brought upon by high voltage static electricity effects that happen like this. Now, I'm not diverging too far into this, because what I'm trying to emphasize here is that the relationship to Venus was one of, it's beautiful. It was part of what made the Golden Age great for people, and the what people saw from these gods, these planetary gods. But it also had this dark side, dark not in the sense of light, but dark as in a threatening, violent, destructive side. And so Venus had this reputation, and so seeing it as the morning star, all right, the light would come back, the light bearer, and so on, was always a breath of relief. Hey, it's still out there, way out there. It's not making its way to us, and so on. It's not cometing and causing these problems that we hear about, in ancient mythologies and so on. These battles that they have in visiting the Earth with Mars, and with the destruction or the eviction of the god Saturn from his throne. Now, by the time the Bible is being codified, written, revealed, whatever your view of its origins might be, is about the time that Venus is starting to settle down. It's my belief that the story of Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah had more actually to do with Mars, but this is open. This is to be researched. A lot more. It could have been Venus at that time, but by the time of Moses and the Israelites, in terms of the narrative of the Bible, these things were pretty well much settling into their current orbits and were no longer a problem. And so the morning star, if you remember, Venus, the Israelite biblical narrative would have always known that the older religions of Sumeria, of Egypt, but particularly the Mesopotamian religions, the star of Ishtar, the star of Venus, that 8-pointed star, was the symbol most associated with that planet. And so that's why it was called the light bringer, but it became associated also as a symbol with what's called the scepter, that would ultimately end up with the royal house of David and such, that would birth the Messiah, that they expected Jesus Christ, who would be given the role of King of Kings, so on like that. And that's why you have a very odd thing that many Christians can't figure out, all right, in the book of Revelation, where Jesus Christ and those who, come to rule with him in the so-called millennial rest are given Lucifer.
Yeah.
All right.
And Jesus also says about himself, he's the morning star.
Yes, that's right. And the problem here, this is, so with that as a background, what I'm now going to say in terms of the confusion is that the main confusion here is a translation. The word Lucifer is a Latin word, okay? And it comes from the Vulgate, and it's been adopted by many Christians to explain a concept of the devil or a Satan, all right, as a proper noun, an actual noun. And like, my name is Troy, your name is Judith. So this Satan, this devil, on his passport, it's Lucifer devil, it's Lucifer Satan. And so that is the way they perceive the word Lucifer. But it should never have been perceived that way with regards the an actual name. And in fact, since the King James
more like
Bible,
a title.
It was never really even a title. It was a description. It was a description of Venus. It was a description of what Venus represented. The Bible takes a lot of what I call, the Saturn mythology, because all religions do. All right, in terms of this is because this is what triggers people's deep-seated archetypes, and they're in their subconscious, particularly on a corporate level. National psyches, as opposed to individual psyches, are triggered by these things like 8-pointed stars and a whole lot of other things that I discussed in my book Saturn Death Cult. But with relation to this Lucifer thing, modern biblical translations drop the name Lucifer entirely. It shouldn't be there. It's Latin. It just simply means Venus. It's the morning star, Venus, and what it came to represent in terms of kingship and the scepter and so on that existed there. It becomes synonymous with Satan and the devil, because Isaiah refers to a king of Babylon or Tyre, as being Lucifer-like. I'm struggling here to just remember the exact details because it's important. The point is that people have assumed that Isaiah was talking about an entity called the devil, that they've named Lucifer through mistranslations of a word that simply should mean the morning star and should refer mainly to a feminine designation, to Ishtar, Astaroth in the Bible, that sort of stuff, but something that, in terms of its connotations to kingship and rulership, was to be passed on to Christ, him becoming the Messiah, becoming the King of Kings, as it's portrayed in the biblical narrative from that point of view. Now, Satan, as a term, simply means an adversary or an accuser. And throughout the Bible, this accuser can be anything. In fact, at one point, in a bizarre story, the accuser, or Satan, is the angel of God confronting a prophet of Baal riding a donkey. All right. And, this is something when the Baal prophet, who Baal is actually a Saturnian manifestation, the Canaanite Saturn, and so on, was going out to curse the Israelites. He was stopped by Satan, an adversary, who was the angel of God. So that should immediately clue people in that the word Satan is not a proper noun. It should never be written with a capital S, as a name. It's simply a term to describe anybody or anything that opposes. All right. And so therefore the angel of God and God himself can actually be a Satan, two people that he's trying to confound. So there's an element of that when the King Saul was sent by God, an evil spirit, as an adversary. When quite obviously they were going to get rid of King Saul in favor of King David at a later stage. We're told that the satanic element here was actually sent forth by the God of the Bible, which goes at odds to the dualistic idea that there is an entity called Satan and an entity called Yahweh or God or whatever you want, and the two of them battle almost on equal terms for control of the universe and so on. This is the dualistic Zoroastrian sort of ideas, the Manichaean ideas that influenced from Persia into early Gnostic Christianity. And so as a result of these misappropriations and misunderstandings of how the word is used, Satan has become a name as opposed to just simply a description of somebody doing something. We know a classic example of this, Judith, is Jesus Christ is about to be arrested by the soldiers in the Garden of Gethsemane to be taken off and executed. All right, they're
behind me, Satan.
Yes, he says to Peter, who is trying to rescue him from something that supposedly the devil would love to have happen. All right. Now, the understanding of that is that why would Christ turn around and say to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan"? And Christians go into all kinds of theological gymnastics to try and say Satan entered in to Peter to stop these guys doing what Satan wanted them to do. All right. This makes no sense whatsoever in terms of what's been played out. What is actually taking place there is that, unknown to many of the the Jewish disciples of Christ, it was needed, according to the theology, that Christ would become a sacrificial martyr. All right. So he needed to be taken. It was the plan that ultimately Christ would become this martyr, to become this great thing. And the disciples, Peter in particular, just weren't with the program at that point. They were still behaving like, "Get your hands off our mate, he's our master," and that and so on. And because they weren't with the program, they were actually trying to thwart what the God of the Bible through Jesus Christ was trying to achieve. They were opposing. They were being an adversary. And that's why Peter becomes a Satan at that point. And that's really the basis of the use of the term Satan in the biblical text. Where things get confusing is, and I put a lot of the blame, the villain in the piece is this adoption of the Book of Enoch, where there's descriptions of fallen angels and Lucifer being one of them. It's a non-biblical book. It's apocryphal. It's about written. Some people put it at 400 to 500 years before Christ, and so on like that. But it's not part of the Torah or the books that happened at that time, and it tells a very different story. And it compounds the era of understanding that we've discussed about who the sons of God in the 7th, 9th chapter of Genesis. I can't remember, 7th, 9th chapter. My understanding is that the sons of God are the descendants of Adam, and that they're having relations with the people, with the daughters of men who existed before the coming of Adam, which of course is at odds with the globalist idea that everybody comes from Adam and therefore the church has authority over everybody who's descended from Adam. It says that this interpretation says that there were people on the earth before Adam, that man called the man Adam, who sired a lineage that would produce the Messiah, but that lineage started miscegenating with the daughters of the existing men of the planet. And that wasn't considered a very good thing for whatever people might think of that, and in terms of how that thinking goes. That's what's going on there. The church, however, has adopted this idea that it's angels coming down, cohabiting with women, producing Nephilim and giants and all kinds of nastiness, and from there, you get this idea that Satan, Lucifer, the devil, becomes an entity rather than the actions of anybody who would oppose the narrative of the Bible.
Yeah. So now, of course, you already mentioned it in the very beginning, and all these lines of thought at one point had to go underground. And that is the beginning of secret societies, because at the peak of the, let's say, ruling church, there was something like, you have to believe this, or otherwise you're a witch and we will burn you at the stake, or whatever it might be. So I would say that, I'm not saying that in ancient times there weren't secret societies, there were, but that of course facilitated this, wouldn't you say?
Most definitely, and also sort of Gnostic thought. For me, the battle that produces the secret society concept post Jesus Christ, or really even post the fall of the Roman Empire. In other words, the medieval into the modern age, where we get the classic secret societies that culminate with Illuminatis and the Templars and the Cathars and these various groups, even the Muslim assassins and these sorts of societies that existed. Yes, they all have their roots in corrupted priesthoods that go back to the times of what I call the Silver Age, which is after the great doomsday event that destroyed the Golden Age, where priesthoods started off, and there are still vestiges of those priesthoods who are trying to reinstitute the great justice, the great period of rule by equal weights and measures and so on that the Golden Age represents, according to my theory anyway. During these times, of course, people became corrupted in the sense that having the power to designate what a weight and measure was gives you immense power over individuals, particularly if you have the power to designate the measure called money, the thing that we gauge the value of our work by. All right, it's the thing that is the most important. So most of these secret societies have their origins in these ancient priesthoods who became corrupted by people who, as I put it, didn't want to sweat to make the earth yield its fruits, and so on. They preferred other people did all the sweat, and the way to control them, rather than pointing a sword at them or threatening to beat them up, much better to just simply control the weights and measures that they trust, and do so in such a way that you trigger their archetypes. Hey, I represent the great power of the universe, and so all the Saturnian archetypes are employed down through the ages. The secret societies that come into the Middle Ages and onwards are beneficiaries of the knowledge of these archetypes, these symbolic archetypes and so on like that. And they start to realize it works as a way of controlling people, because what happens is that you can't necessarily say you are God, but it gives you the power to say, I speak for God. And secret societies have this battle with the vestiges of the old priesthoods, whose idea is that God must be a just God, and that a judgment day is what is awaiting us, where God will judge in righteousness, to this idea that it wouldn't it be better if we lived in a world where you could position yourself to have influence with God, and as a result of that influence, you could avoid whatever disaster might be initiated by that God as such.
What do you mean by influence?
By influence, I mean that, and this is where magic ritualism and ritualism becomes such an important factor,
okay.
and where the corruption of much of the stories of mythology becomes anthropomorphized into human dramas and so on. Because if you can emulate if your interpretation of the mythologies is something to emulate in your own power plays amongst people and so on, then it stands to reason that if you follow some of these patterns, you will come to the attention of whatever that great force is, Demerge or Saturn or Yahweh, whatever it is. You will come to the attention in a way that is favorable to you in the eyes of a capricious God who can be influenced and so on. Now, that's the overall religious thing. Most of these people involved in this stuff, even Roman Empire emperors who dabbled in this kind of stuff, all right, it's not influence with the God himself. It's influence with the guy above you in the pecking order, in the hierarchy and such, all right? And so eventually you have a society where it becomes a matter of influence, where that person has something on you and you have something on them, and it's in your mutual benefit to wink at each other and say, yeah, we're together against all the general population. You know, this is what Masonry, the Masonic phenomenon is since the Renaissance that has sprung up in our society. It's all about creating a network of influence, and that spills over into the religious concepts, whereby ritual becomes a means of generating influence with the spiritual entities that control the planet. And you have to believe that the spiritual entities are essentially amoral. All right. The Abrahamic religions and some of the Eastern religions and Hinduism, that they like to talk of a God who is primarily righteous. Okay, can be trusted to do the right thing. The great Saturnian distortion that has come down through the ages is that God can be influenced. He's capricious. Sometimes he has a bad day and he takes it out on the world. And if you have good influence through your ritual activity and through your family connections and all that sort of stuff that goes into the culture that we've built up over the last 2,000 years, then you might be overlooked when that God decides, I'm going to wipe out 90% of humanity, which is what happened in Doomsday when the Golden Age came about as a result of planetary catastrophes. And that's why I've written that book, Satan, Death, Cult, to let people know it has nothing to do with a force of a spiritual force deciding I'm going to get rid of humanity and so on. It was a natural cosmic occurrence that has become interpreted as the actions of a capricious God that can be influenced. And you know, this is what stems from these distorted understandings of mythology, the cannibalizing of one's children, the regicide, the incestual relationships between brother and sister, father and daughter, these kinds of issues, even down to the transhumanist concept of the androgynous, self-castrated God that Saturn, you know, became at the end of the Golden Age. A lot of people overlook that aspect, that what informs us of the Golden Age is that it was the death of Saturn. He became a castrated God and such, could no longer produce anything of worth. And that starts to influence the idea that the next great Saturnian Golden Age will be the preserve of an androgynous, non-reproductive form of humanity. And that's where the transhumanist agenda becomes one of the most obvious marks of what I call the Saturn death culture in the world today.
Yeah, and you have these a lot of offerings. I remember when I was in Sri Lanka, I attended a puja a couple of times. And yeah, people rolled with coconuts in their hands and tried to crush the coconuts while doing it, and that would mean that evil spirits will leave them.
Yeah.
And then when the monks came,
yeah,
there was a certain music playing, and they all went through that temple, and gave their offering. There was rice and vegetables and some notes of money, and the money was taken by the monks right away. And it always has a little bit, yeah, this taste that you have to soothe God.
Yeah. Well, you see, one of the fundamental differences between the Abrahamic religion's concept of God and creation, as opposed to what we get through, you know, the Persian influences, the Manichaests and the Zoroastrians and so on like that, that influence Greek thinking. And that is that in the Abrahamic religions, God creates the world and the universe, the physical universe, and says it is good. In the Greek interpretations and in some of the Eastern interpretations, it's the Demerge that creates the physical world and is fundamentally evil. And humanity's objective is to somehow arise above the physical universe and go to heaven or the spiritual things. So you have this battle starting off in what I call the Silver Age with these priesthoods, where you've got like the Melchizedek priesthoods, the Atum priesthoods of Egypt, the mystery schools of Egypt. They are fundamentally resurrectionist. In other words, you're resurrected after death back into a physical world that is perfected over a period of time, and you've learned the futility of you know, not doing it the right way, so to speak, you know, in terms of the created God. They are battling against the reincarnationist idea, which has two variations. You're reincarnated into new life forms, new personalities as you go through life, which is very much a Greek and often attributed to, you know, Buddhism and Shintoism and so on like that. But the Greek version of that also talks about going to a heaven, which is a better place than the evil earth. And so if you live on the evil earth, your job at this point in time is to make sure that is to try and assuage the evil earth from taking you out, from making life hell for you. All right. You're living in hell according to this concept in the earth. And the more you can do to protect yourself from what the earth is going to do to you, what hell is going to do to you, the better off you'll be, the better off your family will be. And so many of these rituals are formed and evolve over time as ways of kind of protecting yourself against this demiurge idea of the physical universe is out to get you, that nature is a killer, nature is going to destroy you. And as a result of that, the people who become most powerful are the people who control the rituals. You know, they watch you. You didn't do that quite right. You didn't cross your fingers properly there. You took 7 steps instead of 8. You know, all this sort of stuff, right? There's all this minutia that comes with it, but it's all control mechanisms. All right. And people believe that those control mechanisms will protect them, because the proof in the pudding, in the eating of the pudding, is in the fact that the guys above you are doing better than you, and they've done these rituals. All right. So that's what drives it as a social mechanism. And you know, it's driven Catholicism, it's driven Protestant Christianity, whether they like it or not. They're on the same realm of, their whole idea is to influence God into accepting them into heaven, to get away from the whole rapture concept of Christianity, that, you know, the good Christians get taken away while God lets the earth then, you know, lets Satan and his demons destroy the earth and create havoc and all kinds of evil. This is all Greek in its origin. It's not biblical in its origin. And so there's always been that that battle between those who would want to influence an evil world to leave them alone or to promote them to, you know, more beneficially than the people they're competing with for the resources of the earth. And they've battled against those who have another idea, which is, when you die, you know nothing, but you get resurrected into a perfected world. But even that gets corrupted, because you see that with the Egyptian tombs. They wanted to take their wealth with them. They used to drag people into their tombs. The Chinese emperors did the same thing, and they'd kill everybody and say, "You're coming with me because I want slaves when I get resurrected." All right. And, so you've got that, both forms become corrupted. But I think for many people in the esoteric world, it's a path between the ancient mystery schools of Egypt, which informed the Melchizedekian, Hebrew sort of thinking and so on, versus the, the Mesopotamian gods that were largely adopted into the Greek pantheons and so on, and how they developed their ideas of the physical world being actually an act of evil that we need to escape. We see that conflict in the way even the religions operate. Christianity is a particular example of this. You've got people who believe in either the resurrection, or you've got people who believe in this rapture, go to heaven sort of concept, which is very dominant in Catholicism and most of evangelical Christianity. There's very little difference in that concept between the Catholics and the Protestants in terms of today's evangelical Christianity and Catholic Christianity. It's that it's that battle where you see the development of all these rituals that have led to the corruption in people trying to win whatever your way of thinking is, get ahead of people. Whereas what I will say is that the advantage of the resurrectionist idea is that at least the original concept is that resurrection is something that happens when God corrects, or the creator God. I should be talking about that, okay? Because there'll be Saturn worship type things that have this resurrectionist idea and so on like that. But it's the idea that God perfects through justice, not through influence, how we relate to each other. And so, how in other words, it's a religion of the idea of the contract that exists between two or more people, and how that is governed and how disputes are dealt with. That is the resurrectionist aim, the righteous God of judgment. And therefore God is not an entity in the sense of a physical, not physical, but spiritual being. God is that set of perfect weights and measures and laws by which we can count on perfect justice. And the Christian concept that Christ is God, for people who follow that idea, I count myself, I'm not proselytizing here, because it's not important to me if people believe this. I'm just explaining a way of thinking. The important aspect about that is that Christ becomes God, not in the sense that he is divinely born or anything. It's because he becomes the perfect personification of the word that was the laws and the righteous judgments. So much so that his life is lived where he doesn't contravene those laws. And so that's why you get that idea, the esoteric idea that every human has the capacity to become a god. This is very much a part of Gnostic thinking even and so on. But in this kind of thinking, that ability to be a god goes right back to that idea with Eve, that it is the ability to know right from wrong and to make the correct choice. All right?
Okay. So great. That was a wonderful first hour. And now in the second hour, we will dive into the priesthoods of the Silver Age and the ancient secret societies. And I'm pretty sure we have a lot of gems in there. So this was it. This was the public hour, and we will see the patrons on the other side.